I think here we have fundamental disagreements. And again, I have to always caveat about my authority on these matters. But with all due recognition of my limitations in this aspect, I do believe two things. And I say it respectfully because I follow you, I respect you, you know what you're talking about clearly, and you have a lot of experience, which counts in these matters for sure. I think what you're saying is completely wrong and just plays into Israeli propaganda, and it facilitates, regrettably, it facilitates the genocide in Gaza. So let's start with the beginning. Number one, Israel held back on sending in troops for about 3 weeks from October 7th to October 27th for a very simple reason. It didn't want, the troops don't want to die. It's bad PR, it's bad for Netanyahu domestically, and the people don't want to die. So Israel waited 3 weeks and it pulverized Gaza. So there would be nobody there to resist as it incrementally, very slowly went into Gaza. You couldn't resist. It's like talking about resistance in Hiroshima after dropping the bomb, or resistance in Nagasaki after dropping the bomb. You can't resist. There's nothing there. It's completely pulverized. I think that needs to be sunk in, or the listeners have to let that sink in. When you're talking about an intensity of bombing that was greater than Dresden, greater than Hamburg, greater than the London Blitz, then you in an area that's the size of a marathon by the area I jog, it's age 70 each morning, and you have an intensity of bombing like that. How can there be resistance? It's just not sensible to believe that, in my opinion. Now, you cite numbers. Where do these numbers come from? Where do these numbers come from? You say 40,000 troops. I talked to 40,000 members of Hamas and the other armed groups. I talked to many people in Gaza. I asked them, I'm curious, people got out, I speak to them. They said to me at most 15,000. At the uppermost limit, 15,000. Okay, now you talk about 20,000 killed. Israel says 20,000 killed. Where does that number come from? We know exactly, or in my opinion, we know exactly where that number comes from. You know where it comes from? Israel's PR, it has to show that the ratio is always 1 to 1.5 to 1. That means 1 to 1.5 civilians to 1 Israeli, 1 Hamas militant killed. So if you follow, as I do, each time the Ministry of Defense the Gaza Ministry of Health, each time the Gaza Ministry of Health releases a new number, let's say it releases a number, 15,000 people killed. Immediately, Israel says, we killed 7.5 thousand Hamas militants. Or they'll say 7,000. So it's closer to 1 to 1.5. For each militant we killed, 1 civilian, and then what do? They go around saying, their PR people like Kemp, go around saying this is the best ratio in any war that's ever been fought. That the average ratio, they say, is 3 civilians for each militant killed, 4 civilians for each militant killed. But here it's 1 or 1.5. The numbers are completely invented. They're just PR numbers. It's completely ridiculous. If you follow the accounts, the bodies are splattered into 10,000 pieces. There's one body part on a roof, another body part in a ditch. How could they count these numbers? How is it physically possible to count these numbers? You know as well as I do, they will not go anywhere near a Hamas unit. If somebody fires at them, they send in their helicopter gunships, they fire their artillery wherever it is. They're not going near it because they don't want to die. That's the bottom line when it comes to Israeli. Israeli has no army. It has an air force, but it does not have an army. They don't want to fight. I'm not blaming them. I'm just I'm sitting safely in Brooklyn, New York, but I'm just saying it's a factual matter. They don't want to fight. So they never even get near the bodies. So how are they doing the count? Where is the count coming from? Nobody asks that basic question. Where are the numbers coming from? It's perfectly obvious where they're coming from. It's coming from Israeli public relations because they want that 1 or 1.5 to 1 ratio. So all of their PR people, their Hezbollah people can go around saying, this is the cleanest war in the world. Which brings us, the one number which I believe is accurate is the number of Israelis killed, because that's very easy to control, or it's very easily monitored. So if you look at the number of Israelis killed, it comes to less than 1 a day. It comes to less than 1 a day since October 7th. Now, less than 1 a day is not a war. It's a genocide. And there is what I consider the most fundamental point. How do you characterize what's going on in Gaza? Is it a war where we should be applying the laws of war, the principle of distinction, in trying to understand it? Or is it a genocide in which the war aspect is completely trivial? And if you want to see the juxtaposition very clearly, you take the UN Commission of Inquiry's report on Gaza, the Navi Pillay Commission, and you juxtapose that to the South African application to the International Court of Justice. Navi Pillay's commission, it talks about the laws of war. Is Israel obeying the principle of distinction? Is Israel obeying the principle of proportionality? Is Israel obeying the principle of discrimination? The South African application, it never talks about Hamas, because Hamas is the most trivial aspect, the most marginal aspect to what's going on. It's a genocide. It's the destruction of the infrastructure and the population of Gaza. And when you heighten scrutiny of the military aspect, you are facilitating the genocide by acting as if there is a war going on there. There is no war going on in Gaza, or I should say, it's a marginal aspect of what's going on in Gaza. The overwhelming fact is a genocide is unfolding in Gaza, and the war is a sideshow.
If I may answer to that. First of all, yes, it is true that the size of explosive that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is equivalent or even inferior to the one dropped on Gaza, without the radiation, of course. However, the people in Japan did not expect the enemy coming to drop these nuclear war weapons, but the people in Gaza expected the Israelis to come and start bombing them. This is why the resistance was not only above the ground, but also under the ground. The figures that I have offered is to condemn the Israelis with their own information. It is not to describe what kind of war unlawfully or how the Israelis perceive the resistance and what is going on in Gaza, but precisely to say that providing the information given by the Israelis, there are more than 200,000 people killed and wounded in Gaza. And if we take the Israeli numbers that are less than 10%, much less than 10% of the combatant according to the Israeli information. So I am condemning the Israeli information from the horse mouth. It is not by saying this information is correct or is wrong. Nevertheless, even with the information provided by the Israelis are not telling the truth throughout the war. First, they have a law that they have passed on in 2000 or 2002, considering the resistance as unlawful combatant, which means they have no right whatsoever. They can arrest them, they can kill them, they can starve them, they can do whatever they want without a trial, and this is exactly what they are doing. So I am not here defining every aspect of what is going on in Gaza in the way you are doing it, but I am responding to the fact that the resistance did not surrender, and yes, it is still fighting. Otherwise, in Jabalia, the Israelis would not have casualties every single day, despite the fact that this is not the first time they try to break into Jabalia, or perhaps the first time in Jabalia camp, but they still suffering casualties every single day, which means notwithstanding the quantity of explosive that fell on Gaza, that is unimaginable, the resistance is still pretty much alive.
Norm, you want to come back at it?
I think I made my point. I don't believe that the numbers have any basis in reality. The numbers are used as a pretext to justify what Israel is doing in Gaza, claiming this 1.5 civilian to combat 1.5 to 1 civilian to combatant ratio. I don't believe the numbers Israel has given and are repeated about the numerical size of Hamas and other militant groups, of their number of troops, has any basis in reality. I don't believe the numbers given for the length of the tunnels has any basis in reality. I don't believe the numbers given for the one number I think is accurate, because it's so easy for Israeli journalists to monitor, is the number of Israeli combatants killed. And that comes to less than 1 per day. Now, maybe there was some change with the recent quote unquote operation in Jabalia, though frankly, I don't believe a single word the Israelis say. If I asked the Israelis what's the weather, whatever they would say, I would still look out the window to check. It's not a joke. You have to understand, really, you have to understand Israeli society. Israeli society has an unusual degree of social solidarity. Now, yes, there are always arguments between religious and non-religious, but that sense of social solidarity in war is very impressive by the standards of any country at war. And you have to remember, every Israeli serves in the army, with marginal exceptions. So every Israeli feels this sense of identity with the army, with the cause, and what attends that is they're very free with the lying, all of them, because they all feel the sense of identity. I was just working on a chapter in the book I'm writing on the whole question of rapes, okay? So you have, in the case of the Nova Festival, so they claim that as many as 38 witnesses stepped forward to say they saw rapes and gang rapes and all this sort of stuff. It was like a bacchanalia of barbaric intercourse going on at the Nova Festival. It's rapes to the left of them, rapes to the right of them, rapes everywhere. But there's a strange fact. There isn't one visual image, not a single visual image of rape, not one. They had 5,000 photographs that they showed the Patent Commission. 50 hours of videotape. That means 2 hours for every hour of the attack of video footage. Now, you know from your generation, every time there's a public transgression, there are people videotaping it on their iPhones, right? That's how your culture, your youth culture operates. You have as many as 38 witnesses. They say they were lying hidden as they observed these rapes. Not one of them thought a snapshot. Not one of them. Forget about a videotape, just a snapshot to document the rape. Not one. You could say it's a wartime situation. But wait, there was tons of video footage of other atrocities committed by Hamas and other groups on that date. Israelis were taking pictures. And we know from Gaza, being in a war situation doesn't deter Israelis from videotaping, right? So how do you account for it? 38 witnesses. You know why? Because they're all liars. I'm sorry to say. That social solidarity, they're all liars. They'll say anything. So I start from, we can't trust a single word they're saying. And then I move to, these numbers make no sense. How did they count the bodies? How did they count these bodies? They say the figure was just quoted of 20,000. Where did they count 20,000? How did they count that? None of it. It's all PR. And it's all PR for a much bigger purpose. The purpose is to pretend there's a war going on there. And that's where myself and your guest, I can never pronounce his last name, Magnier?
Yeah.
Elijah. I'll just go Elijah. That's where Elijah and I disagree fundamentally. I don't think it's a war. I take, if we can have a choice, if we had to put it in simple terms, I take the position of the South African application. They never talk about a war. I mean, they've been faulted for not mentioning Hamas once in their application. That was correct. I think they were absolutely correct because it's a complete sideshow to what's going on. The essence is there's a genocide going on. And the moment you analyze it or depict it or portray it as a war with a resistance and all that other stuff, the moment you portray, depict, analyze it in those terms, as the Navi Pillay Commission of Inquiry did, you're completely playing into the Israeli hands. Because you're making it out as if the issue is Israel is not fully obeying the laws of war. No, the issue is that Israel is acting out the logic of genocide. It's not whether they are obeying the laws of war, it's that they're obeying the logic of genocide. Those are very different things. And I think there has to be absolute clarity about which, so to speak, paradigm we're using or which lens we are looking through to understand what's going on in Gaza. Those two paradigms, laws of war versus logic of genocide, are incompatible. And if you use one, you are occluding, obfuscating obscuring the other. And that, I think, happens whether it be by UN commissions or by your analysis. I think it obscures, obfuscates, occludes the fundamental reality that what Israel decided on October 7th was no more mowings of the lawn. We are for once and for all going to solve the Gaza question. That was their determination on October 8th. Hence, all the genocidal statements, which then they had to retract, but remained operative in what was actually unfolding in Gaza.
I want to give Elijah to respond on this segment for one final time, and then we can move on to a few other things. Just to keep the viewers with us, as I see the debate, I think Elijah would agree with Norm that it's probably it's inflated. The 14,000 figures that Israel says are the militants, the Hamas fighters, as opposed to 16,000 civilians. But what Elijah is saying, as I understood, is that yeah, maybe the numbers are inflated. It's overwhelmingly civilians, but we can still think of resistance while this genocide goes on. And I think that's what Norm is saying, as I understand, is that the resistance is so trivial that by talking about resistance in this genocide, we create an impression that there is a war, and that feeds into the Israeli propaganda PR machine. So Elijah, if you can summarize or sum up your response to this fundamental debate about whether the resistance is significant enough, whether we should even be talking about resistance and agency, or whether we should talk about just genocide, and then we can move on to other segments.
Well, I don't think there are many points I disagree with Norm on. However, I take it from a different point of view. And I like to always use, of course, nobody can count the bodies, not even the Palestinians, because there are thousands under the rubble. Therefore, any figure is inaccurate. However, I have learned to take the information from the Israelis and condemn the Israelis according to the information they are releasing, accurate or non-accurate, and in all the cases, they are inaccurate. Secondly, I am very careful in using the word genocide because there is a court against the Israelis of intent of genocide. Of course, the action on the ground have all these indications, and this is why the International Court of Justice accepted the case against Israel. And because what Norm said, I fully agree, the Israelis retracted on many of what they have said because they realized that they are condemning themselves not only by their words, but also by their actions and the films of their own soldiers on the ground. So, but we're talking about two different things. Norm is talking about the what is going on and condemning what the Israelis are saying, which I fully agree with, and I am taking it from a different aspect. If this is a war, in my business, I call it a war, but there are no laws in this war because the Israelis are not respecting any law. They're not respecting international laws, the Geneva Convention. They don't think even it exists or it is applicable on the Israelis, on the Palestinians, because from day one, they demonized the Palestinians. Therefore, they took away any law that can be applied in terms of war or non-war, genocide or no genocide. Even non-combatants have some protection. Schools, they need to be protected. Churches and mosques should not be bombed. United Nations buildings should not be attacked and destroyed. United Nations personnel should not be killed. European Union buildings should not be destroyed. Journalists should not be killed. So all that, are no law for the Israelis that are applicable in Gaza whatsoever. But not even that, even all the laws that are thrown in the face of the Israelis by the international community, even that they are ready to challenge and counterattack and reject any right of the Palestinian to exist. On that, I don't think there is a disagreement whatsoever.
I would just like to make one last comment, and I'm eager to hear what you have to say about Lebanon, because I have many curiosities there, and you know much more than I do. The reason Israelis are not respecting the laws of war is a very simple reason, and I think that cuts to the heart of the matter again. They can't respect them because they're committing a genocide. The fundamental principle of the laws of war is the principle of distinction. Everybody knows it. Just means you're not allowed to target civilians. Everything in the laws of war builds on that foundational principle. If you move up, 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 and up, it's the foundation principle is the principle of distinction. You can't target civilians, okay? Now, theoretically, you can win a war without targeting civilians. You can win a war. You can just target military objects and combatants, defeat the opposition army, and you can win the war. But hey, here's the rub. You can't win a genocide unless you kill civilians. That's the whole point of a genocide, not to attain a military victory. The whole point of a genocide is to annihilate the civilian population. So when you say Israel's not respecting the laws of war, there's a very simple reason why. Because they can't respect the laws of war and achieve their goal. Their goal is a genocide. So there, I think, again, it's critical to trying to make sense of what's going on, to what's your point of departure? Is it a genocide or is it a war that's unfolding in Gaza?
Well, I don't think it has started with a genocide because the Israelis have conducted other unlawful wars in the past, and they committed many crimes against humanity and war crime. But this time is different. They have received the Americans and the European leaders and every single leader around the world, giving them the carte blanche, giving them the green light to do whatever they want with Gaza from the first beginning. And this is why they unleash all their criminal side and they behave in a way that they have never seen before. And I don't think the Israelis are the only people to be blamed, even if this is the tendency, and they have not learned from the past. They have not learned from what happened in the past, but they have carried this burden with them, applying it on the Palestinians because of the complicity of the international community.
Well, there's obviously no difference. Israel couldn't breathe a single breath. It couldn't breathe a single breath without the support of the United States. The US is the chief enabler of the genocide in Gaza, and that's not rhetorical. That's factual. That's written. It's imprinted on every weapon and every ammunition and every hour of every day that the US is transferring to Israel. So it's not a rhetorical flourish to describe the US as the enabler in chief of the genocide in Gaza. So there is no difference.
And Europe.
Well, and Europe, but Europe does whatever the US says. Look, if the United States changed its position, Germany wouldn't change its position. Come on, that's not serious. You don't think Schultz wouldn't do an about face the moment the US changed its position? You think the Germans don't know what's going on? You think the German leadership is happy with what's going on? They're disgusting. They're morally repugnant. But if you ask me, no, Schultz is not very happy about being party to a genocide. And if the United States gave them an exit ramp, or what's an off ramp, they would jump at it. It's the U.S. That's how Professor Chomsky used to always analyze the world. And you know what? I think he was right. The more I study it, the more it becomes plain to me. Yes, it's right. The center of evil, whatever you want to call it, is in the U.S. But in the case of the previous Israeli operations, which are just high-tech killing sprees, in the case of the previous, the only person who really got it right was the Goldstone report. He said the purpose of the Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, he said it was to punish, humiliate, and terrorize the civilian population. That's the purpose of these high-tech killing sprees, to punish, humiliate, and terrorize the civilian population. That's true. So they weren't wars in the conventional sense, because the war in the conventional sense is to disable and defeat the opposing military, the opposing army. But that's not really what's been going on in the operations. The difference in the current situation is very simple. If you use the Israeli metaphor, in all the previous operations, their goal was to mow the lawn. And on October 7th, or October 8th, they revised the goal. The goal was now no longer to mow the lawn, but to extirpate, to pull out by the root every blade of grass in Gaza. That became their goal. And of course, that goal functions within the constraints of the international community, which means, of course, the White House primarily. And so limitations are put on that goal. But you could see that immediately as those limitations are relaxed, which is what happened with the presidential election cycle, the moment they're relaxed, they go mad. They go mad. Believe me, I don't want to say believe me, why should he believe me? But in my opinion, lurking in the heart of everyone in Israel's leadership and the population at heart, lurking in the heart is the sentiment of that minister of antiquities who said early on, we should nuke Gaza. That's what they aspire to in their heart, but constraints imposed by this thing called international law and morality that puts limits on them.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have 2 requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.